Hi everyone, and welcome to our lovely panel here today. We're here to talk about Colonial Legacies, deep conversation. For some of you who are returning to Bye this year, you may know that myself and AFLO were on the panel last year, and AFLO was the one leading, and now turntable.
Take a break.
So this time I'm going to be asking the questions, and don't worry if you weren't here last year. It is a bit of a sequel where we're going to be talking more about sort of how we can action some ideas and how we can try and change the way things are working. So it's a little bit of a sequel, but don't worry, I will catch you up as we go along. So before I let the panel introduce themselves and we get into the conversation, just a little bit about me. So my name is Vaneet Mehta. My pronouns are he, him. To give you a visual description, I have brown skin. I'm an Indian man. I have long, kind of slightly wavy hair down to my shoulder. I currently have 2 plasters on my face. If you want to know the reason why, that will be for later. Just an interesting incident this morning. I have currently a black vest on and very florally short. I have a gold necklace that says "Be gay, do crime," and a really nice little Indian earring. I am a writer and public speaker. I am the author of the book Bisexual Men Exist, which was nominated for a Lammy this year. Thank you. And I'm also the co-editor of an anthology with my friend who's in the audience, Lake, called It Ain't Over Till the Bisexuals Speak. So now I'm going to let the panels introduce themselves. Do you want to start with?
Okay, hi. I am Joshua Street like the quality chocolates. First, what I look like. So it's hard to know. So I'm brown skin Caribbean man with short afro, side trimmed. I have a whole bunch of panther and gold rings on with a gold African necklace and a panther pair of glasses, and I'm wearing a really queer, swirly jacket with jeans and blue socks and blue trainers. Is that right?
Yeah.
I do a number of things. I'm a facilitator, coaching organizations on business, technology, and HR. I am a spoken word poet, like this awesome one here. Woo. I also am a governor for Great Ormond Street Hospital, and I run an organization called the U Collective, which delivers mental health workshops for underserved communities. The first one we've done is called Black Mental Health, getting men of the African Caribbean diaspora to talk more about their mental health. We've supported over 260 men in the space of a year, and we have a community of about 76 African Caribbean men that are queer, straight, gay, trans, cis, and it's just a beautiful way to just get men to just talk, do the work, and to be better than they were yesterday.
Great stuff. Hi, my name is AFLO the poet. My pronouns are she, her. I am a brown, mixed race, Caribbean woman with a brown afro, freckly face, got glasses on and like a pink patterned dress with a Palestine pin made by Brighton Queers for Palestine. I am the tagline I like to use to describe myself is I'm an artist, an activist, and an academic. So I've been doing spoken word poetry for around 5 years. It's taken me to some gorgeous places. Activism-wise, I was involved in some like grassroots organising, and now I am co-founder of BARCO, which is the Black Anti-Racism Community Organisation. We work on cultivating more spaces and opportunities for Black joy and Black culture back in Brighton. Oh, don't break the things. It's all good. And I'm also an academic. I'm very slowly doing my PhD at the University of Brighton. It's slow because I don't like the bureaucracy of it all. It's very colonial, and my work is around decolonising ideas around Black people, their experiences of psychosis, particularly within the context of intimacy and love, to think about more humanising aspects from people who have been dehumanised for centuries. Yes, that's me.
Hi everyone, I'm Hafsa. I use any pronouns, so he, him, she, her, they, them are all completely fine. Description-wise, I'm wearing a sort of rainbow Lucy and Yak jumpsuit because gotta represent Lucy and Yak. I'm wearing rainbow laces. I've got a blue hijab or headscarf on, and I've got Bai pride-colored makeup, sort of representing the Bai flag. I'm brown, also Indian, Muslim. Yeah, I'm not very good at describing who I am or what I do, which is not great for a panel. But what I do is I have a day job working in charity. I work for an LGBTQ plus charity where sometimes people are calling in when they have a not great time, and my job is to kind of support people through that and safeguarding sort of things. Outside of that, I do a lot of visibility and awareness work around queer Muslims and queer people of faith and queer people of colour. There are loads of people out there who share my identity. I'm just very, very privileged in that I'm not at risk compared to many members of my community. So I try and use my privilege to actually bring a bit of visibility to a community that is burgeoning and massive and very much exists, but not all of us can be out, unfortunately. And that's a large part of my work. I also do work with local universities on suicide and self-harm awareness and understanding for healthcare professionals, mental health awareness, talks around disability, disability inclusion, invisible disabilities, with like quotation marks attached. And yeah, just going around talking to people is a large part of what I do.
Hi everyone, I'm Priya. I was just checking the mic worked. This is my first panel today, and my pronouns are she, her. My work is in EDI. I've been in EDI for about 2 years now. I currently work at the Institute of Physics, and a lot of my work is about looking at universities and higher education sectors and trying to bring underrepresented groups into physics, into science community, and kind of looking at data as to why that's not gone to plan, and sort of looking at trends and how we can sort of increase that across the country. Outside of work, I work with BEAT, an eating disorder charity, and most recently I've been involved in an exhibition looking at eating disorder recovery amongst underrepresented groups. So yeah, it's nice to be here today.
Amazing. So we're going to get into a panel. Before we do, just let you know there's going to be some very heavy topics talked about today. If you do need to leave at any time, please do. Or you need to look at your phone. It's totally okay. I understand this is quite heavy themes. So the first question I want to start with is around supporting decolonizing our home countries, I guess, and where we reign from in our heritage. As we know, the British and various other countries have conquered most of the world and have impacted them, especially when it comes to anti-LGBTQIA plus laws and various other ways that they have changed the landscape of the culture of our communities. So what work can we do in order to support those countries and help them in their efforts of unpacking all of this and removing these laws? And big question, how do we support this work? So let's start down here. Go down.
Sure. So I have some neurodiversity, so sometimes I have to write notes. But one thing that first came to mind was throughout our actions, we have to dust off the shackles of colonial history and make the sleeping giants of our ancestors remember how powerful they are. I say this because I was in Brixton and remember I was saying the story, and someone stopped me, and she was Nigerian. She was telling me about like why I should join religion, and I was like, yeah, but I'm queer. And she was like, oh. And long story short, we haven't got time. But I said to her, does God love everyone? She went, yes. And she went, okay, does that include queer people? Yes. But God doesn't agree with what you do. So I'm like, so God doesn't love everyone, and you can't accept me to the church. And when I asked her about kind of her Yoruba root, she was like, that's witchcraft. And it was really shocking. And I had to tell her, the same way that you see like queerness is the same way I see religion today, and you don't see the connection between like slavery and colonization and changing people's entire being because of religion to where we are now and how underdeveloped Africa is. All of us can go outside to a toilet right now and get running water. How many of us have actually been in these communities where like we have phones and AI, but there's no infrastructure, there's no pipes? So for me, I think outside of, you know, the lovely words, we need to use things like media, education, policy, and diverse discussions, similar to what I do with the Black Mental Health, as well as like leveraging some of the amazing stars we have. Kendrick Lamar released a beautiful song called My Auntie Is a Man Now. And it's such a beautiful, heartfelt story of transphobia in the African Caribbean community, but also how we can do better. And if you look in the past, it's like, actually, this was normalized. And because of colonialism, that's why it feels weird now. And yeah, like we need to look back at like Caribbean buggery laws, and like we need to have intersectional discussions. Like when I do the Black Mental Health, like queer people are always like, I didn't know straight people suffered with X, Y, Z. And the amount of straight people that go, I didn't know that like a queer person like doesn't have, like African Caribbean people don't have a community either. So like for me personally, we need to get more queers and Rastafarians in the room together, because we're all fighting the same battle. We're all fighting white supremacy, patriarchy, and we're just trying to make sure everybody's free. Mm-hmm. But yeah, shared conversations.
Yeah. Thank you. Very much agree with everything that you said there, Josh. I have Jamaican heritage, and I was really blessed to go to Jamaica last year, but not just going to Jamaica, I got to go on a queer thing in the mountains in Jamaica, and it was hosted by Stacey Ann Chin, who is a Jamaican lesbian poet, a spoken word artist, and she bought around 70 acres of land up in the hills to create this space where queer Jamaicans of the diaspora could come together, experience being on the land. She called it Black to the Land, which was just so like, oh. And not only did it feel incredible going and having that experience as my first experience of going to the island, but the experience of engaging with all these queer Jamaicans that we're told don't exist or exist in isolation. One of the days when we were there were a couple of coaches that came up to the hills, so filled with about 50 young queer Jamaicans from Kingston. And we were up in the hills talking outside about what it was to be queer. And a few people said at different points, this is the first time I've spoken about being queer outside. And that is, again, because of these colonial legacies, right? I think when you think about Jamaican music sometimes, there's an assumption that there is inherent queer phobia, homophobia in there, particularly against gay men. And when I've also then been running these Black events in Brighton, and we're talking about what songs are and aren't okay to play, there's then been discussions about, well, that's the culture. And it's like, but it's not. It's not. There's been a culture that existed for so much longer than slavery itself, let alone these legacies that we've been left with. And so I guess we not only do we need to have these discussions amongst ourselves, but in terms of impacting the countries from which we find our roots, I don't think it's about us going over there and saying, like, this is how you should do it. It's about finding grassroots organisations that already exist there and investing in those and encouraging people with bigger pockets to do the same. So another little tag on, Brighton Pride, corporate pride. There was a lot of boycotting going on this year. I decided to march in the parade with a friend who is Mauritius, and she'd gotten funding to be in the parade, and the funding came from a brewery. The brewery made a beer. Any money made from selling that beer is going to a grassroots community in Mauritius to have nights out together, because there isn't queer nightlife there. And it's like, would that not be the way to decolonise corporate pride? Like, yeah, you can be in it, but any money that you're putting in, that's got to go somewhere else. It's not about staying here. The other thing about Brighton Pride was that they had flags around the city this year saying about how homophobic all these other countries were, particularly African countries. And there was no statement around, this stems from colonialism. Instead, there was a hashtag at the bottom that said, hashtag we love because they can't. And it was like, how privileged can you be? Like, to be able to celebrate here and not change anything where we've gone around changing things for so many centuries. It was so...
Also, not even talking about hate crime being on the rise here, but, you know, like, It's like the UK's sort of haven.
This was at the exact same time as the far right were going to be coming down to Brighton, and then it's like, look what this African country does, look what that African, look at it, like, So there's so much unpicking to do.
So I'm going to talk about some depressing things, so just stick with me, but if you, like Vaneet said, if you want to like step out, do. I met one of those people at, it was Trans Pride. Oh, hopefully you can hear me, sorry. It was Trans Pride. I'd just come down for a different event, and then I was going to go join the parade. I was at Euston Station. I went to go take the lift, and I ran into this woman who looked at my T-shirt, which said, I think, trans rights are human rights. And she was like, oh, what's that about? And I was like, well, trans rights are human rights. Some people want to harm our community, and I think that's bad. Because I was like, I don't want to get into a talk with a stranger. And then she was like, oh, interesting. And then I said, yeah, people like Tommy Robinson. And then she just touched me, and she was like, oh, yeah, we're going to that. I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, we're going to that. And I had this bizarre conversation with this woman I want nothing to do with, where she was talking about how like she's just standing up against fundamentalists and stuff like that. And I was like, okay. And I was trying to stay so hard to stay calm because I don't want to represent my community badly, right? And I said, well, I'm Muslim, and lots of my loved ones are afraid of what's going to happen because of you. And I was trying so hard to stay calm, and I was just like, she was like, oh yeah, no, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. It just kind of occurred to me, like, these people live in a completely different bubble to me. Yeah. Like, I'm sitting there thinking about, like, my day-to-day. Am I going to be safe? Are my people going to be safe? Are my people abroad going to be safe? And, like, they don't have to think about that, ever. And for her, it's like, I'm having a nice day out. She had her little dogs in a pram, you know, like, and the dogs were cute. I'm not, no shade to the dogs. But, like, and it just occurs to me, like, but this is also how I'm viewing things. Like, I have so much privilege to be able to go here and, like, talk to people about my queerness. That is not the norm for a lot of people in my community. And it just occurred to me, like, okay, she has no idea what she's so the racist lady has no idea.
I know you weren't talking about me.
You know, the racist lady with the two dogs that I saw has no idea what she's talking about. But also, I feel like I can't speak to my community in specific ways because I come from a place of so much privilege. All I can do is bring their voice with me and talk about the experiences I've had. But I also know I sit in a space that is not the norm because most people can't do this because it's not safe to, because they're at risk of ostracization and losing everything. And, you know, having that conversation with yourself and who you are and how you identify and your wider community. And, like, my kind of push with that privilege has been less, they should all accept us, everything should be fine, and more like, if they're allowed, if they're in the same room as us, even if they're not necessarily acknowledging my queerness in the same way, they're not marching at Pride, I still see that as a win. Yeah. They're still letting me into the room, and whereas I have conversations with other people who feel like that's not enough, like, but they should accept every part of us, and I'm like, this is a start. And maybe it takes 10 years, maybe it takes 20, 30, 40, 50, I don't know. But every generation changes, right? And, like, I go into schools, I talk to kids, and I can see that change. And sometimes it feels like it's going backwards, but sometimes it feels like it's going forwards, where kids are talking to me about queerness. And, like, I think back to when I was in school, I was like, we didn't know what queer meant. I'd never heard of an ace person before. Like, none of these things were, like, regular conversation. Of course, these identities existed, but it just wasn't something we talked about. And now I'm seeing that change, and I'm just hoping, inshallah, or, like, God willing, that change will occur, you know, as it continues. And eventually I'll reach a point where I'm not running into strange ladies with the dogs going like, yeah, it's all right, isn't it? Because it's not all right. That's me.
I'll keep mine short and sweet, but I think for me it's about the education and awareness and that link between, when we think about, like, colonialism, I think a lot of the time through the resources that potentially we've been exposed to, a lot of the time it's looking at race and ethnicity. And I think that link between sexuality and gender probably needs to be stronger. And I think that goes across from when you're looking at the curriculum, to when you're looking at kids in school, to when you're looking at teenagers, and then just kind of branching off into society and into community, and then transcending that into workplaces as well. So I think a lot of the work needs to come from the true facts regarding colonialism holistically, rather than just singling it out in terms of race. And also then kind of as you were saying about kind of intersectionality and looking at people more than just sort of belonging in one box and one-dimensional. People belong to many different boxes, and I think it's about looking at people holistically. And I think it's also understanding how those systemic issues when it comes to colonialism are still deep-rooted in those countries, and looking at kind of survival techniques that needed to have them there when the British came over, and then sort of what made them retain that. So looking at sort of that divide and conquer technique, part of the reason potentially as to why those views are still ingrained into the societies is because there was already that division created, and you kind of see that here with the Conservative Party, where you see like the distraction technique, where they try to bring an uproar, whether it be regarding trans rights or whatever, because actually they're just paying off their mates for contracts regarding healthcare. And so straight away you've got that kind of division and you've got that distraction already there. So it kind of gives them more freedom in terms of power, which essentially they all want. So yeah, that's kind of my view.
So in a similar vein, I now want to bring it back to, I guess, the UK and to our communities here. Something I find particularly within my community is that a lot of them have dealt with a lot of traumatic events, especially when you look back to our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation. They've dealt with a lot of really horrific past. And they kind of love to pass that down, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally. And you get this kind of really awful generational trauma being passed down and down to each generation. So I want to know, and the answers may be very similar, but what can we do in order to try and break this cycle of generational trauma to help our older generations understand what our society should be like and try and help them move past some of the things that they've experienced? Can I start, Dee?
Yeah, sure. So I think I have a few ideas on this, but I'll try and be short and sweet. I think creating safe spaces for the older generation to air what they went through and to talk about their trauma, and I think for them to also be validated and for there to be a level of understanding as to the beliefs and the things that they believe, as to so we can understand why they believe them, as opposed to just thinking, okay, they're old and that's how it was, then it's not acceptable, you're cancelled kind of thing. And I think that then helps to dismantle that fear. I think a lot of the thing that I've noticed in my work and in my personal life is people are scared to say anything because they're scared to get it wrong, and if they're scared to get it wrong, then they don't want to learn, and straight away people are then resistant. So you have to kind of say to people, it's okay to get it wrong and there's going to be hiccups along the way, but it's all about the intent. And if you correct them at the beginning, and I think I can always tell what people's intent are, or I always try to, because you're not always going to get it right, and I think language changes over time, and it can be difficult to keep up with that, but if you can call people out and you can call the older generation out and say, actually, do you know what, that's not acceptable, this is why, and have that open conversation, I think that's the first step. I think also just linking sort of like the young people and the older people together and then role modelling those behaviours, I think is really powerful, because you can, once you've kind of validated their trauma, and you can then put forward why in our society and talk about kind of like the modern terms and how things are now, I think straight away you're already role modelling those kind of inclusive behaviours. And even just doing that in your day-to-day, your parent or your grandparent may then begin to think differently. And that's what I've found personally to be quite successful. I can't put out every fire all the time, because I'd end up probably having a heart attack because I get so angry. But I think role modelling those behaviours and just being strong in the sense of actually calling it out when you need to call it out, but in a non-confrontational way, because like my aim is to bring people on the journey, not cut people off and say, okay, right, that's you, and this is not where I am, unless obviously, of course, it's horrifically bad. But I think it's always trying to see other perspectives and where people are coming from.
I think also, just adding on to that, I'm not going to phrase this very well, but being a representation of a community group in a way that they don't expect, breaking stereotypes. The amount of people I've met from my community where we've had a chat and then we talk about the LGBTQ plus community, and then they'll say something like, oh, Warlord Bargal here, those people are crazy. And then I'll be like, I'm bisexual. And then like the tonal shift of like, oh, but they've already gotten to know me, and their perspective of what an LGBTQ plus person might look like or seem like or act like has shifted because they did not expect that. And we know that these stereotypes are not true, but they maintain through the community of like, this is what happens. You become gay and all of the bad things happen to you and your life is over. Obviously, we know none of that is true, but that message gets passed on over and over again, to the point where I sometimes hear it in classrooms from children where their parents are telling them, you can become gay if you hang out with a gay and that will happen and your life will be over. And then it just continues. And like, I just enjoy challenging that in a sort of gentle way, but just saying like, okay, why do you feel that? And then I'm not a religious scholar, but I do enjoy quoting scripture at people because they enjoy quoting it at me. So we have a little quote off, which I really enjoy, where if they're saying, I believe this because, I'm like, cool, where does it actually say that in the Quran though? Because like, I think this is just something you've just decided. And even then, let's chat about it, like, I mean, whether someone is religious or not, I think most people want good in the world and most people want to be kind to each other. But maybe they've been led to believe that there's this evil community or there's this specific group and they're going to wish you harm somehow. They're going to spread the bi-ness or they're going to do something to you. And it's like, well, let's have a chat. Why do you feel that way? Why don't we let you have a chance to meet someone like me? Mm-hmm. And I've seen this on the other side where I can't remember what program it was on TV. There was this guy that was like really racist towards Muslims. And then there was a Muslim who's like, why don't we just have a chat? And it was like, oh, he's actually just like a decent guy. It's like, yeah, okay, I'm not saying we should ever put ourselves in harm's way. Please don't think that's what I'm condoning. But if someone's at a point where I don't quite understand and they're open to talking to you, I'm kind of at the point where let's have a conversation. Let me show you what this community is like so you can understand that, there's nothing evil or wrong about who we are. Whatever we do, whatever forms we take in the community, like we're just as different and diverse as other communities are, and we're not evil, wrong, or bad. We're just people,
I agree with all that you've said so far, like as well as cultivating braver spaces in which can have these conversations intergenerationally. Also, trying to challenge people's views gently where you can. But I think there's also a lot of room for choosing not to engage, whether that be your family or however painful that may be, because I also think it's kind of colonial to think that you have to stick within those confines when, like, I think most of us in the room can relate to finding some sort of queer community or queer family and how healing that can be. Finding older, brown, queer people and being able to, like, talk to them about things is so inspiring. And that's never going to be my family. It doesn't mean that, like, they need to be cut off, but at the same time, I don't have to owe that if I don't choose to. It's nuanced, but I think there's room for all of those responses.
So one thing I've been wanting to say, so I was going to say it for the end, but I'm going to say it now. All of us as queer people are on a different journey, and I love analogies, so bear with me. So we're all seeds, right? Some of us, like myself, my partner, many people in the room, like this may be their first ever, like, bi pride, or their first pride, or UK Black Pride, or UK Trans Pride, right?
You wrote UK Black Pride?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see it.
I was getting my wine. But yeah, so this may be your first ever experience with queerness. Your job is to just explore, enjoy the community, and find your place. Then you've got people that are sprouting. I'd say, like myself, went to my first bi pride last year, met these amazing people, and now I'm here. So same for you all. And then you've got the stems and the flowers of, like, right, I'm here. I am going to be a representation of our community. Not only the people here, there's amazing people in the crowd that have done amazing work with queerness. And then you have the fruit, right? And not every plant has fruits, and that's fine. But only if you have the capacity to give that support, to give that education. I've got 3 really quick examples. Like, my Uncle B, every time there was anything to do with knife crime, he would come to me And he's also a Caribbean man. He'd be like, oh, Josh, look at this in the Metro, look at this in the Evening Standard. I'm like, Uncle, do you know who owns and runs these papers? Yeah. And every time I'd come with an articulate answer, he would throw another piece of nonsense at me. Yeah. And it's weird, I get this when I do diversity inclusion in corporates, but hearing it from family that are from the Windrush generation, it just hits a little bit different. But eventually I had to give boundaries. I saw him this morning. And it's like, Uncle, I love you. This is the dumbest thing you've ever said. I love you. But to the point my mum and my ex at the time, they were like, did you? I'm like, sorry. Please, Uncle, do research, not just for me, for your daughters as well. My dad, he's from the Dominican Republic. I identify as a Haitian because Viva la Revolution. Many people don't know there's an intersex/trans community in the Dominican Republic called the Guavadoses, which means basically born genderless at 8, boop, welcome to your genitals. And it's not until I told him this, as well as his best friend told him that he's gay, and my dad's in his 60s, he was like, oh, they are people. And I'm like, and I have people in the Black mental health that will say some really ratchet stuff, and it's not until they realize that I'm queer too, they're like, oh, but I didn't think you were like that. Like, but queer people are so... And I'm like, and this is upsetting because then sometimes people say to me, no, you know what I mean?
I love being.
It's like don't get me wrong, I like doing this at UK Black Pride, sure, but like, this is me on like a work/day-to-day. And I often then find sometimes the other side, and I'll say this for another bit, it's like, oh, but you're straight acting. Oh, you're not queer, you don't look queer. And I'm like, but what does queer look like? And I'm like, oh, what, so I must go, hello, boys, how are you? Like, no. So like, there's a lot of work on all sides, but long story short, and all these examples to one side, just have self-awareness of where you are in that journey. Are you a seed? Are you just embracing the community? Are you sprouting? Are you exploring, trying to find your community? Are you a flower? Are you a representation and being the change you want to see? Or do you have capacities to give fruit? And all of those are valid.
I love that analogy. That's great.
Take it for free.
We're already running down the time on this. Can you believe? And I had so many questions lined up, but if there's only one question I can get in before the end, I think this is the most important one, which is, I'm sure many of us have been seeing what's happened since the last Pride in Palestine. We have seen the horrific events, the genocide, the destruction of history and monuments. It's just awful. So you can see from what's happening is that colonization isn't done, right? Mm-hmm. Colonization isn't this long historic thing that happened centuries ago. It's still going on to this day. How can we use our past and everything that we've seen happen in the past with colonization and the dismantling of it, how can we use that in order to try and impact change in what is currently happening and the current efforts of colonizing of countries such as Palestine? Who wants to start?
I don't think that should fall to us. I think that needs to fall to our allies.
Yeah.
Because time and time again, people are coming up to me, talking to me about Palestine. I'm like, I've been cognizant of this war my entire life. Mm. And so have all of my loved ones. So has everyone in my sort of family or community. It's always been on our minds. Yeah. It's your turn now. And it's not your turn to fix it, but to start talking about it, to keep the conversation going, to highlight that, because my legacy to this is just pain. It's trauma. Mm. Yeah. And I don't want to relive that by bringing that with me to protests, bring that with me to spaces where I will do them if I have the capacity to, if I could think about it. But there were days where my feed was just full of all sorts of things. And I was like, I can't do this. Yeah. I work in charity. I want to focus on that right now. And maybe that's my privilege talking, like, I don't want to deal with this. But I think this is a space now where I'm calling on allies to step forward and be there, be at the marches, be at the events. Like, I did not go to any of the anti-racism protests because I was scared that I was going to get attacked. Yeah. And not scared that for my own well-being, because I don't give a damn, I'll fight back. But but I was just like, that'll take me out of the work that I want to do. And I won't give them the power to do that to me. But I saw the protests. I saw so many people come out. Like, ironically, I saw like a sea of white, and I was like, yes, finally. Yeah. Like, we're safe. Whiteness, do it. Like,
that's exactly what happened to me in Walthamstow. I was like, we put an extra lock on our door, and we're like, we're staying inside. And it was a sea of white, and I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it should be. You need to put yourselves in the firing line. Yeah. I completely agree.
That's my thoughts on it.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
So couple of times when I've been in marches for Palestine, a black person unknown to me has approached me and gone, "Don't forget about us in the fight, sis. Like, don't forget to do the work for your community." And it's like, I'm sorry. Again, it's this like divide and conquer thing on a mass scale of like, how do we not see the connection? How do we not join the dots? And I had the same from family members as well, say, "I don't recognise who you are online, like you're not okay. Don't forget to like fight for your family." Fighting against colonialism, is it not one joined up fight? And like, I think that's particularly when I was out in Brighton when the threat of the far right was there. Like, yes, it's a sea of white, but it's also a sea of queers and trans folk. And I think more so in Brighton than possibly anywhere else in the country. But that joined upness, that like community is what's going to pull us through. It's everyone doing everything that they can. We don't have the answers, otherwise it would be done. But all we can do is try.
Yeah, I think that, because that was going to be one of my questions about the divide and conquer technique. And it's when we start doing it to each other because we think there's this tiny piece of pie, and if we don't focus on ourselves, and they don't seem to understand that white supremacy thrives on divide and conquer. Like, that's how they win, and we need to band together. So, yeah, totally agree.
So I find this is hard because, if anyone watches Dr. K on YouTube, he often talks about like emotional burnout and like empathy burnout, and I often feel really like angry when I see what's happening, and I'm like, there's nothing I can do. Like, there's nothing more I want to do than go and fight the IDF with my hands. But like, there are so many things we can try to do. So I've connected with this amazing woman in America that she's like trying to put some money together for families. There's amazing channels like Navarro Media. There are a whole bunch of communities that are doing like bake-offs, or they're kind of doing organizational partnerships. And something that's really hit me is what you just said. The idea that people are very narrow-minded. The same way I spoke about the pastor in Brixton, and she was like, "This is Christianity. This is why like, African Caribbean people need to be Christians." It's like, no, like we can all be Christians. It doesn't have to be on narrow lens. And I remember reading that whilst there was apartheid in South Africa, people in Palestine were fighting against that. And not many people know that. And it's about having this intersectional approach. Like, for example, if somebody from the crowd starts shouting some like racist slurs towards me as a Caribbean person, I'm sure you two would jump in and support me. The same way if someone was saying anything that was anti-Asian or Islamophobic. And it's by understanding, as you perfectly said, that once we actually remind ourselves to come together, yes, I am not a woman, but I stand for women because there's women in my family and I want everyone to be free. Yeah. I am not from the Asian diaspora, but I love my Asian brothers and sisters and they deserve to be free. The same way I'd like you to think that me as a queer Caribbean man deserves freedom as well. And I'm going to end it on what Stokely Carmichael says, we're not free until we're all free. Black power for the black man, yellow power for the yellow man, brown power for the brown man, pink power for the pink man or pink person. Because again, this isn't trying to like clutch at straws and like, oh, I've got 7 straws. No one else. We can all drink. We just need to remember to share.
Yeah. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree, obviously, with what everybody said. I think looking, as I said before, kind of echoing your intersectional approach, like, I think it's very easy for people to see other people in boxes, and I think, as you say, like that divide and conquer mentality has meant that when it comes to like that competitive nature and making sure that, you know, we have the piece of the pie for us and therefore kind of sod anyone else that sits outside of that. And I think actually if you start to break down that and look at the systemic barriers that are causing that to be in place to begin with, it's actually not the other people's fault. And I remember reading something, I think it was by Guz Khan, and he said that if everybody clubbed together who's been oppressed, we will win. And I think sometimes it's not losing sight of that. And I think, you know, you can empathise and you can fight the fight for people, whether you identify, you know, wholly with them or not. But I think it's just remembering that actually oppression is oppression, no matter in what form that comes in. And if you have a voice, use it. So, yeah.
I'm going to squeeze in last question before we open to the audience, so you're going to have to keep it brief because I want to squeeze this one in. I want to add some lightness to the conversation, and I want to talk about the fact that I personally feel that when we have that people of color are often forced to speak about our traumas and all of the negative and all of this awful stuff that has happened to us, and we often don't get to talk about our joy and our freedom and how beautiful and wonderful it is to exist as a queer person of color in our communities. How do we go about shifting the narrative away from the constant focus on our trauma and towards some of the joy? I mean, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head earlier when you were talking about having all those people come together for the first time. And I think that's like, how do we shift the narrative towards more of those kind of open conversations and feelings?
I think it's by following what feels right in your heart, and that if we all do that, there'll be so many different spaces for us all to join in where it taps into someone's heart somewhere. It's like going with what you feel might be right for you, bringing a friend or someone on board, and before you know it, you've created something that someone else might want to join in on, and then you see, oh, there's something else, I'm going to go to that too. We can cultivate all these spaces for ourselves. We don't need one unifying thing to create the joy. We have the power in today. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, just completely agree. Like, we don't need a big space to do things. Sometimes you just have an idea. Maybe your friend has an idea. Like, I have a bunch of skills. My friend has a bunch of skills. We're doing a little workshop together just because we can. And like finding that space, finding the time, just doing the thing, creating that art, creating that work piece, creating that corporate workshop. I don't know, whatever the thing might be. Because it will speak to someone somewhere, you know.
So I wanted to add on, you said about finding space and time, and like it's so important, and we're also living like under colonialism still, right? And we're all feeling the battle of like having enough time to do these things and maybe not being paid for these things that might bring us joy. So it's about trying to find that like balance as well, isn't it? And not necessarily beating ourselves up if we don't go do the thing, but finding a way to do it still, not letting go of the idea. That wasn't a critique of what you said. I was like, I said a thing and then forgot about colonialism and like money and like needing to live. Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think I would just add that. Sorry, my mind's gone blank.
It's okay.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, you go first.
I've only half written notes this time. So for me, like, it's really interesting when I write about joy. I think about all the things in like our community. Like, I've never seen 12 Years a Slave. I haven't seen Django Unchained. I refuse to watch trauma anymore, to the point where my mentor, who gives me space for the Black mental health, he hasn't seen the George Floyd video. And the way that I had to kind of deliver anti-racism to some of the biggest companies in this country, whilst like almost kind of reliving that in my brain and reminding people like that I'm a human, is draining. And I think we need to promote more positive media. Like the algorithms right now on social media, they promote like all this negativity. Like you got World Star and MTV and all these like places that pollute our community. But what about all the positive stuff? There's a brilliant film. Has anyone seen the film Rye Lane? Raise a hand.
Yes.
So for those, Rye Lane. So for those that are sight difficult, only half the room put their hand up. For the other half, please watch it. It is what I call Love Blackchally.
Yeah.
Like literally, it's like Love Actually with African Caribbean people, and there's no war. It's just love, and we need more media, not just queer media, but media in just general that just promotes love, because it's so draining, especially for people like us when our work and day to day we're often like battling against this system, and sometimes we have to remember to just fill our own cup. Otherwise, we're gonna get burnt out, especially when all of us are like candles at both ends. I think the only thing I'd add to that is, in regards to doing community stuff, the Black mental health was made because I fell through the cracks and I couldn't find the space intersectionally where I could talk about mental health and the racism that I deal with and the struggles of being a modern day man that's just trying to do better. And the amount of vitriol I get, like, I'm not going to be ashamed to say this, I put this out on apps, on dating apps. On places like Grindr, the amount of like white men that will say the most atrocious stuff to me, stuff that I can't even say out loud. And then when I go on other apps, there's like white women that go, oh, like, I don't care, like, so long as I get the BBC, like, and that's like the lower end of the stuff I get. And it's so hard. So that's why I say we need to like have moments of like where we can hold ourselves in joy, because the work isn't easy and it's hard and we shouldn't have to do it. But if we do have the ability to have the fruit, we must find ways to kind of give ourselves that nourishment, because it's just not easy. Sorry, that's what
Okay. Short and sweet.
Yeah, I remembered my point now. So I think the thing that I kind of just want to echo is when it comes to sharing the joy of different cultures, I think it's down to the power of the individual and the group of people. I think if you look at things like South Asian Heritage Month and Black History Month, a lot of the time they're used to educate, and that's where I think the trauma sort of response comes from. But actually, then all you have is a group of people that have learned about slavery and all of the negative parts that actually they can't talk to you about the languages or the festivals or the values or food or, you know, just sort of all of the other things that make up a culture and make up people from that culture. So I think it's kind of us changing that narrative in how we deliver that when we have those spaces, and also just like, you know, inviting everybody to those to kind of use that as a learning opportunity, because that's something that we can all do.
So I have taken up a little too much time. I'm sorry. Just very interesting talking to you. So we're going to open up to audience Q&A. Does anyone have any? See Tanaka right at the front. Does someone want a mic? Just at the front there. Yep, there you go.
Thank you. This is a really nice opportunity because we've got people who are out there, like in community, education, arts, doing the hard graft, sort of like at the front lines of things. And I'm kind of aware that we all need a community behind us when we're doing that kind of work. So I was wondering if I could ask some of the people on the panel to share like the best sort of piece of support or the best source of support that has come to them while they're doing that work.
For me, it's weirdly been people outside of the mainstream queer community, because I'm not very accepted in the mainstream queer community or many spaces. But sometimes when I go to like book clubs or whatever, people are really nice to me. They treat me like a human being instead of, oh, we're connecting because we're queer, or they really want to have sex with me, so they're being nice to me, or whatever. Like they just treat me like a human being. That's really valuable to me, and I weirdly don't find it in some of these spaces. So I'm just grateful for everyone in my life who just has consistently treated me like a person, even when like I don't have the spoons to talk in a specific way, or I'm using a walking stick and I look more disabled, whatever that means, or you know, people who just give me the time and space to be myself without putting a label on it, which I know is ironic because I'm like, I'm bi, I'm queer, but like, yeah.
I think for me, I'm going to be as quick as I can. Like, when I was coming out of my queerness, my mentor, Brian, love him to bits, it was his birthday yesterday. And, like, he is the reason I am still alive right now. I'm just going to leave that there. He's a straight man. He has taken me to places I thought I would never be. Met amazing people I thought I'd never meet. And having mentors and having people that have been to that are either where you've been or are where you want to get to is so vital. And like, I'm still struggling to find a place. Like, I've not gone to a kink party that I feel safe in. I've not been to a queer community I feel safe in. Like, the only community I feel safe in is the Black mental health, but I'm working there. Mm-hmm. And so it's that journey, as I said, about the germination of the seed. You have to find it. But I'd highly recommend finding a mentor, finding someone older than you that's been where you've been or has your experience or your journey, as well as finding a mentee. My life has been enriched so much since I had a mentee, and he's about 12 years younger than me. I feel old. And like he's telling me all these things he's struggling with, and I'm like, oh yeah. And I've got a couple of queer mentees that are like, oh, I like trans women, but I can't tell my mum and dad. And it's like, it's cool, calm down, it's fine. You're fine, you're going to be okay. And it's like having a mentor and having a mentee brings so much value to your life. And I think that's what's keeping me going.
Nice. Again, it's more like community, the lovely people that I found in my life, but particularly I'm thinking of one guy who I actually call Dad now. He's only 7 years older than me, but someone thought he was my dad once, and it was
stuck.
Yeah, it sucks for him. But he doesn't share like queerness with me. There's actually a lot of things that we don't share, but actually what we do share is like just a big love for each other. And to feel that with someone, with like a man who's older than me in a fatherly role, which I haven't had, is the most healing, refreshing thing I could have come across. So yeah, nice man.
Lovely.
I think for me, my husband has been a massive support, but I think also I embarked on like an eating disorder recovery a few years ago, and I think exploring that with I think she was a psychotherapist at the time, with her was amazing, because actually I think now it comes from myself. I kind of feel like sometimes I live in a bit of a bubble where it's just me plodding along with what I think, and you kind of think, oh, everyone else is the same, and then you go out in the real world and you realise that's not the case. But I think because of that, I've been able to kind of build everything in my own little bubble by myself. So, for example, like self-worth and self-belief and the things that kind of keep you going, and the momentum and the drive and the passion really just comes from myself. And I always try to practice empathy. Sometimes, it doesn't always go to plan, because it can also be your best friend and your worst friend. But I think always trying to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is worse off than you is the drive that keeps me going. And I think that helps me to protect my peace as well.
I think for me, friends and family as well. I say family, my queer family really. My friends, a lot of them are actually in the front row. So having them around me, in terms of like an actual space, common press, like no one has supported my art more than the common press. When it came to my anthology coming out, they emailed me and were like, so bestie, when are we doing a launch? And I was like, I'm so fucking burnt out, so thank you for doing all the work. So having places that care and want to uplift you is really important. We have 5 minutes left, so we have time for one more question. We have one, let's do the one in the front row here. Sorry, you can talk to us afterwards if you have other questions. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, apologies to whoever that was.
You won.
I was just going to ask, how best would you advise navigating conversations regarding intersectionality in the context of divide and conquer, and how for some people it's their lived identities, but for others it's issues that they can see as conflated, and so when they don't necessarily identify with what it is that you're explaining, how do you proceed?
I'll be very, very quick. So one thing that I've been struggling with, and thank you, I need to read your book, because we talk about it every now and then. I struggle as a multisexual man, because I'm someone that is quite friendly, I'm quite huggable, but I realise when I go on public transport, you don't all see me as a smiling guy. On public transport, I'm still the same smiling guy. The only difference is that you've not heard me, and everybody kind of minimises, and London's not as friendly, so people kind of hunker down. And then when people get to know me, it's this one of three things. So it's either you don't like me because I'm Caribbean, you don't like me because I'm a man, you don't like me because I'm queer. And it's annoying because it feels like, especially the work I'm doing, I'm fighting with all these different waves. And it's by sharing my experiences. And again, being straight passing, whatever that means, showing people who I am. And then when somebody says something transphobic or racist or sexist, I'm like, whoa, that's not cool. And giving them that education, being patient with them, and reminding them of you do know that without X, Y, or you do know I am Z, right? But it's hard. It's so hard being. Sorry, keep it quick. Keep it brief. So hard being a man trying to do better, because not every man, but there's so many groups of men that are misogynistic and that don't want to do the work, and then women still see me as a threat. So it's I'm struggling to find it. So it's by sharing those experiences in my personal experience.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
I'll try and keep it brief as well. I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but I'll try and get through it. I struggle with this a lot because people put all of their assumptions on you. I've had people make so many assumptions about who I am and where I've come from. None of them are true. And I don't feel the need to sit there and explain all the trauma I've experienced to have a right to be in the room, because so many people assume privilege to me. I will talk about the privilege I do have, but I don't talk about where I've come from. I don't talk about the hard days. I don't talk about my childhood. And that's my choice because I don't want to share that. That's something that's very personal to me. I will share it in really specific spaces. I'm not as much of a fan of the need sometimes to sort of pour your heart and soul out at the expense of yourself. And that's something I refuse to do. I'll pour out as much as I want to, but I'm not going to tell you everything about me. And if that means you think I'm privileged and whatever, then fine. I will talk to people that want to speak to me, that are willing to be in the room with me. But if they're not willing to have the conversation, if they're trying to talk me out of existence, they're not worth my time. And there are better people than I who will still talk to them, but I am not that person. I was on this panel with this lovely person. I think she was a priest. I'm really bad with that. But and she was talking about religion and Christianity with people who are talking her out of existence because she's trans. And she said, well, we sit and we read the Bible and we find God together. I thought that was so beautiful. I was just like, we follow different things, fair enough. But like, just the idea of, let's go on the journey together. If you don't want to be there, leave. Mm-hmm. I will leave or you will leave. I will not be in the room with you. But if you want to be in the room with me, let's have the chat, you know?
Beautiful.
I think in terms of like divide and conquer, something that I remember someone saying to me when I was quite young was that all the people of the world will only unite when there's an alien threat. And it was like, oh, so it's just when there's another other, then we can all like join together. And I've got this thought pinging around in my head of like my gran or someone being like, oh, why you got to come up with a new label or a new name for that? Isn't that just divisive? And there's some crossover and interlink there, right? Like sometimes we need to name these experiences because they've been erased, but actually then what we want to do is like be able to assimilate all these things without erasing like the individualities of those experiences. It's actually like we're just all human. We're all human, except for some massive capitalists that don't believe that they can ever be human. They're the aliens, and we need to unite against the 1%. That you've just given me. I've thought through what my answer is to that question now. Convincing people that we need to tackle the aliens that are already on Earth, and that will unite us all. That will be the divide and conquer in the bin.
So yeah, I think for me, it's kind of leaning on from that. It's explaining that actually a lot of the things that are used to divide people, if you put them aside, we're all here for the same thing. Because actually, if you spoke to everybody and was like, right, what's the 5 things that we all want kind of solved in the UK? People talk about the healthcare system, they talk about housing, they talk about all the things that no matter what background you come from, we are all striving for the same goal. So I think that's the first thing that I do. But also secondly, it's like when we talk about intersectionality, like we all belong to like different groups and different bits. And it's like asking that person, so where do you see yourself? Because they may see themselves as not being intersectional, but actually that's not true because we all are. So I think it's applying it in that sense. And then, yeah, I just think, once you do that, and then you kind of, from that you can build onto like a personal story. So for example, if your grandson was this, if your child was this, if your sister was this, because I think people often have these thoughts and these, ignorant views a lot of the time. And as soon as you put, well, actually, if that was your sister, if that was your child, or if that was your mum or whatever, then suddenly it changes because it's like, oh no, but because you know that person, then suddenly you have that like empathy towards them. So I think it's sometimes spinning it round that way.
I often like to try and remind people that like whatever's happening to a certain demographic won't just impact them. You should care about it because it impacts them, but also it will come to you too. I especially talk about it when it comes to trans women because the impact of trans misogyny does actually impact all women because it's also like, especially when you talk about sports, they often say, well, you can't have men in there because and it's like, right, why can't you have men in there? So you're trying to say women are weaker? And then you have the same thing with like chess. You can't have trans women in chess. It's like, so you're saying women are intellectually inferior to what you think are men? Like what? Like, so it impacts all women, especially impacts like black and brown women. It then will impact trans men. It goes so much further, and so you need to make sure that you're fighting for everyone because it will hurt you whether you think it won't or not, will or not. We do have to wrap
Can I just
up.
add 2 names?
Yeah.
Iman Khalif, Pastor Semenyo.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That is all the time we have. We have run a little bit over. Very, very briefly, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me anywhere on social media at THE Joshua Street, so the Joshua Street. And I'm also here anyway, so say hi.
You can find me at AFLO the Poet. That's spelt like Afro, but with an L, because it's an Afro with a flow.
You can just search my name and bisexual and I show up.
I'm on Instagram, and it's just my name, Priya Ebenezer.
And you can find me at the very professional handle of Nintendo Mad 888 because I am nothing if not a professional. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Please do stick around. There are amazing panels coming up. This has been Colonial Legacies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.